You know, if you've ever cooked, there's a really good chance you've reached for a McCormick spice jar. I mean, they're a staple in kitchens literally all over the world. But behind that familiar red cap is a huge global business that's navigating some, well, very spicy economic times. So let's peel back the label on their third quarter 2025 earnings report. And believe me, this isn't just about paprika and pepper. Nope, this is a fascinating look at how a giant in the food industry is handling things like inflation, tariffs, and our own changing habits as consumers.
You know, the story of this quarter is a classic tale of good news and bad news. On one hand, sales are looking pretty strong, but on the other, profits are really feeling the heat. It's a fantastic snapshot of how a global leader has to stay super agile.
And this really brings us to the core question, right? When everything from raw ingredients to shipping is getting more and more expensive, can a company like McCormick still actually deliver growth? Well, let's find out.
Okay, so let's start with the bright side of the report. The headline here is really simple. People are buying more McCormick products. The demand for flavor, it is clearly not slowing down.
So this top-line number is really key. Net sales were up 2.7% compared to the same time last year, and that's a really healthy sign that the business is growing overall.
But, to get the purest look at how the core business is really doing, we have to look at something called organic sales growth. Basically, this number just strips out factors like the changing value of the dollar against other currencies. It gives us a much clearer picture of the underlying performance. And look at that. Even when you take away all those external currency effects, the company's core sales still grew by a solid 1.8%. So what does that tell us? It tells us the growth is coming from the fundamentals of the business itself.
Now, this is absolutely crucial. That growth isn't just from them raising prices. The company made it a point to say it was volume-led, which is just a way of saying that people are physically putting more McCormick products into their shopping carts. And here's the number to prove it. The actual volume and product mix gave them a 1.2% bump in sales. Think about that. In a time when everyone is watching their budgets, seeing an increase in the quantity of products sold is a very, very strong signal.
And we can see this success in a few specific areas. The company called out a really strong performance in its hot sauce brands, and they saw expanded distribution for their core products, things like these seasoning mixes, and even new items for the super popular air fryer.
All right, but here comes the twist. Just because you're selling more doesn't automatically mean you're making more money. And that is exactly the challenge McCormick faced this quarter. Their profits, they got pinched.
So this is the central puzzle of the quarter, isn't it? I mean, with more products flying off the shelves, you'd expect profits to follow right along. So what's getting in the way?
Now, on the surface, this looks, well, balanced. Organic sales grew 1.8%, and adjusted operating income also grew 1.8%. But ideally, you'd want profit growth to outpace sales, especially when you're selling more stuff. The fact that it's just keeping pace, well, that points to some serious pressure on profitability.
To really get this, we need to look at the gross profit margin. Think of it this way. For every dollar you make selling a bottle of spice, the gross margin is what's left after you pay for the actual spices, the bottle, and the label. It's a huge measure of efficiency.
And right here, this is the problem. McCormick's adjusted gross margin shrank by 120 basis points, which is just a fancy way of saying 1.2 percentage points. This means that for every dollar of sales, less profit was being generated compared to last year.
So who are the culprits? Well, the company was super clear about it. First, the cost of raw materials, the actual spices and ingredients, is going up. Second, they're dealing with more tariffs. And third, they're investing in their facilities to support future growth, and those costs are hitting the books right now. So, when you're facing this trio of profit villains, what does a company like McCormick do? Well, they don't just sit back and take it. They've laid out a very clear recipe for how they plan to fight back and protect that bottom line.
Their plan is pretty much a four-pronged attack. First, they're using data analytics to source raw materials more effectively. Then they're pushing for more productivity in their operations. They're also leaning on a big cost savings program. And finally, they're using what they call surgical pricing, basically making careful, targeted price adjustments instead of just big sweeping increases across the board. The CEO's message here really sums it all up perfectly. The focus is on controlling what they can control internally while being nimble enough to react to the external pressures they can't, like tariffs and inflation.
So with all of this going on, strong sales, squeezed margins, and a clear action plan, how does it all add up for the rest of the year? Let's take a look at their updated forecast.
Okay, so the first piece of good news for investors is that the company is sticking to its guns on sales. They still expect to hit their full-year sales growth targets, and that shows a lot of confidence that we're all going to keep buying their products.
But here is the direct impact of those profit pressures we were just talking about. This table shows their forecast for adjusted earnings per share, or EPS, and you can see they've had to lower the range just a little bit, trimming it by 3 cents on both the low and the high end. This is the tangible result of all those rising costs.
So when you boil it all down, it's a story of resilience meeting reality. The demand for flavor is strong, no doubt about it. People are buying more. But that economic environment of higher costs is very real, and it's squeezing profits. McCormick has a plan, but they've still had to slightly temper expectations for the bottom line. And all of this leaves us with a final, bigger question. McCormick's challenge is really just a reflection of the choices we all face. As costs go up everywhere, their balancing act between price, volume, and profit is one that plays out every single time we walk down the grocery aisle. What is the right price for the flavors we love? That's something we'll all be deciding in the months ahead.